What do you need to know if you receive a civil money penalty or no tobacco sale order complaint? We'll tell you in this special 5-part edition of FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars. Welcome to this edition of FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars. Education and information for retailers and small businesses, sponsored by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the Center for Tobacco Products. I'm David Racine. Thanks for joining us. The FDA has created this multi-part webinar called CMP and NTSO Complaints to assist you, retailers and small businesses who have received a civil money penalty or a no tobacco sale order complaint, which we also refer to as CMPs and NTSOs. Now we'll cover this topic in 5 parts. This episode is part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints. In part 2, we'll cover how to pay a CMP using the online payment portal. Part 3 covers how to file an answer and the consequences for not filing an answer. Part 4 reviews the settlement process, and Part 5 will go over the hearing process, including what happens before the hearing is conducted, during the hearing itself, and after the hearing. Now, all 5 webinars are available on the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars webpage. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov and type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. And the webinars are organized by year. Now, let's start the first webinar. I'm joined by Lieutenant Brian Thomas from the Office of Compliance and Enforcement. Lieutenant Thomas will present the Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints. Lieutenant Thomas?
Thanks, Captain Racine. This webinar, the first in our series of 5, will focus on CMP and NTSO complaints. Specifically, we will discuss what is a civil money penalty, also known as a CMP, what is a no tobacco sale order, also known as an NTSO, and what is a complaint. Included in this discussion will be a description of what is in a complaint, a description of the documents that accompany the complaint, and an explanation of what happens after you receive a complaint. A civil money penalty, or CMP, is simply a monetary sum assessed for violations of the law. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, known as the FD&C Act, gives FDA the authority to assess a CMP for violations of certain requirements of the Act. The monetary sum assessed is based on a published penalty schedule, and the amount varies depending upon how many violations of the tobacco regulations occur during a specified period. Because FDA's Center for Tobacco Products counts violations of the regulations when determining the CMP amount, an inspection could result in more than one violation. If a retailer is found to have violated certain requirements of the FD&C Act as listed in the complaint, they may be liable for the amount of the CMP sought. A no tobacco sale order, or NTSO, is an order prohibiting the sale of tobacco products at a retail establishment. A retailer who has repeated violations of the tobacco regulations may be subject to an NTSO order. Repeated violations are defined as 5 violations of certain tobacco regulations within a 36-month period that constitute a repeated violation. The maximum NTSO period that CTP intends to seek is 30 days for the first NTSO, 6 months for the second NTSO, and an indefinite period for the third or subsequent NTSO. FDA has compiled a glossary of common terms that you will encounter when dealing with CMPs and NTSOs. Please feel free to use this glossary when viewing this webinar series or when reading your CMP or NTSO complaint. The glossary is available as a download at the Tobacco Compliance Webinars page on the FDA website. We'll remind you how to find that website at the end of this webinar. Now, we'll discuss what a CMP or an NTSO complaint is, what you'll receive with your complaint, and what happens after the complaint is delivered to you. Retailers receive CMP or NTSO complaints when the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products has evidence that indicates an establishment violated the Tobacco Control Act. The FDA's Center for Tobacco Products initiates a CMP or NTSO action by serving a complaint upon the retailer or its representative. Serving the complaint simply means that the complaint has been delivered to you. In most cases, you will receive your complaint at your retail establishment through a mailing service such as UPS or the U.S. Postal Service. Now, let's turn our attention to the complaint itself. A complaint is the legal document that identifies the statutory or regulatory violations that are the basis for seeking a CMP or NTSO. In other words, the complaint tells you the information that FDA's Center for Tobacco Products is using to seek the CMP or NTSO. The complaint also identifies the amount of the CMP or the duration of the NTSO that FDA's Center for Tobacco Products is seeking. The complaint has several sections that provide important specific information. The first section is called the introduction. The introduction identifies the parties to the complaint. In a CMP or an NTSO action, the parties are the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products and the retailer. The introduction also sets forth the amount of the CMP sought or the duration of the NTSO sought. The next section of the complaint is called the Legal Authority section. The Legal Authority section sets forth the laws governing the sale and distribution of tobacco products and the authority for a CMP and/or NTSO. This is the first page of a sample CMP complaint. On the far right side, it is titled Administrative Complaint for Civil Money Penalty. An NTSO complaint looks just like a CMP complaint, except it is titled Administrative Complaint for No Tobacco Sale Order. As you can see, the heading or the caption identifies you, the retailer, as the respondent for this complaint. Throughout the CMP or NTSO process, you will be referred to as the respondent, and the Center for Tobacco Products at FDA will be referred to as the complainant. The caption also lists the docket numbers for the complaint. We will discuss docket numbers in more detail later in this presentation. The first page of the complaint contains the introduction section and begins the legal authority section. The current allegations section of the complaint, among other things, provides the most recent facts and circumstances forming the basis for the action. It sets forth the name and address of your establishment. In CMP complaints, this section also provides the brand names of the tobacco products that were involved in the violation, the dates and times of the most recent violations, and the specific laws that you allegedly violated. The previous case history section provides information about the retailer's previous CMP and NTSO history, including the dates and specific regulatory violations alleged in previous complaints, and the outcome of those actions. If this is your first CMP, there will not be a previous case history section. The complaint will also have a section titled Responding to the Complaint. This section provides you with specific information on how and when to respond to the complaint. If you choose to contest the matter, you must take action within 30 days of receiving the complaint by filing an answer or successfully requesting an extension. If you take no action, you could be issued a default judgment. Answers, extensions, and default judgments will be explained in detail in our third webinar, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. The complaint also informs you that you have the right, but are not required, to obtain an attorney to represent you in this case. Your complaint will be accompanied by several documents. One of them is the cover letter. The cover letter is addressed to your retail establishment. The subject line of the cover letter will state whether a CMP or NTSO complaint is included, and will include your establishment name and street address, case docket numbers, and the retailer case number. Docket numbers and the retailer case number are used to identify your case and are used in filing documents, when paying CMPs online, during the settlement process, and during the hearing process. We will address when and how you will use docket numbers and retailer case numbers during each relevant webinar in this series of 5 webinars. The cover letter also sets forth the amount of the CMP or duration of the NTSO sought and provides contact information for the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. The cover letter also outlines the various options for responding to the complaint. These options are: Option 1. Acknowledge that the violations occurred and pay the full penalty amount. This option exists only for CMP cases. Please view the second webinar in this series, How to Pay a CMP Using the Online Payment Portal, to learn more about the acknowledgement and payment process. Option 2. Settlement. Please view the fourth webinar, The Settlement Process, to learn more. Option 3. Request a hearing. We cover that in the fifth webinar, The Hearing Process. And Option 4. Request an extension of time to file an answer. Watch the third webinar, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer, to learn more. Finally, you will find information on how to submit documents. In addition to the cover letter, FDA's Center for Tobacco Products encloses with the complaint inspection documents and photos related to the most recent inspection that led to the CMP or NTSO action. For example, you may see a report by the inspector, photos of the evidence collected during the inspection, or a photo of your retail establishment from the outside. Once the complaint has been delivered to you, the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products files the complaint with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Departmental Appeals Board, also known as the DAB. Filing means submitting a copy of the complaint to the DAB. The filing of a complaint for a CMP or NTSO officially opens an administrative enforcement action. The DAB employs several administrative law judges, also known as ALJs, in its Civil Remedies Division, or CRD. The CRD ALJs provide impartial, independent review of administrative actions, such as CMP and NTSO cases. The ALJs are qualified under the Federal Administrative Procedure Act to conduct hearings on the record. For more information regarding the DAB, visit the DAB website at the link provided in the slide. A CRD ALJ will be assigned to each complaint filed with the DAB. The ALJ determines the procedures and the outcomes of the complaint based on submissions from both sides. Once the DAB has a copy of the complaint and the ALJ is assigned, the ALJ will send information about the procedures to be followed for each specific case to you and the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. The roles and responsibilities of the ALJs are discussed in more detail in the webinar on the hearing process. This concludes our introduction to CMP and NTSO complaints. To summarize the material we have covered in this webinar, we have defined a CMP. We have defined an NTSO. We have discussed what a complaint is and what information is included in a complaint. We reviewed what is included in the cover letter and other documents that accompany a complaint. We have discussed the entity that conducts CMP and NTSO hearings. And finally, we provided you a glossary of terms that may be helpful as you watch the other webinars in this series, or as you read through the CMP or NTSO complaint that was delivered to you. Now that we've covered the basics of a CMP and NTSO complaint, we encourage you to view the other webinars in the series to help you understand the CMP and NTSO complaint processes. The remaining webinars are Part 2, How to Pay a CMP Using the Online Payment Portal. Part 3, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. Part 4, The Settlement Process. And Part 5, The Hearing Process. We have additional webinars available to provide more detailed background information regarding CMPs and NTSOs, such as how violations are counted and what amount of CMP or duration of NTSO may be assessed. In particular, please watch Retail Compliance Check Inspections, an overview for tobacco retailers from 2016, and Guidance for Industry, determination of the period covered by a no tobacco sale order and compliance with an order from 2015. You can find these webinars on the same Tobacco Compliance Webinars page as this webinar. As a reminder, you can find all of our webinars by typing FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar on the main FDA homepage. Thank you for watching Part 1 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints, brought to you by the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, whose mission is to protect our kids and the nation's health from the dangers of tobacco.